to their parties much more than it did. In the old days, we all remember that, Democrats could be conservative, especially in the South. Republicans could be a liberal, especially in the Northeast. Party affiliation was a much different animal. It was much more regional. National level party politics really didn't emerge except in presidential races. And this, of course, is a trend that's been going on for over 200 years and continued before and after. But with senators being selected by a state legislature, they reflected their state parties, not national parties. Nowadays, elections cost a lot of money. A Senate race is going to cost over $10 million. A congressional race, to have a reasonable chance, you'd better be prepared to drop at least $2 to $5 million minimum. And that's if you happen to live in a small state with not a lot of people. So in order to get the recognition and the support, you really need that national backing. That's why incumbents have such an advantage. And that's the key. Now that you have to be popularly elected as a senator, you have to worry about getting re-elected. And this problem becomes worse because it means that if you're going to continue to be a part of the party, you have to toe the line, you have to play the game, and that ties you closer to your party, it ties you closer to their ideology. This is one of the reasons why Democrats and Republicans have become more and more ideologically rigid over the last century. The days of conservative Democrats and liberal Democrats are gone. They're pretty much all liberal Democrats. Republicans are at least nominally conservative. Yes, there are exceptions and problems, and John McCain and whatnot. The point here is that a senator could be more independent of that, while congressmen were more dependent on the national. And that conflict between state and national party organizations was very healthy and very good, and allowed more infighting, more opportunities for people like us to have a say. So that 17th Amendment changed everything. The best way to change it, and the only way to change it, is to repeal it or amend the Constitution again. But one critical thing is, in an era where the 10th Amendment has gone out the window, in an era where we're worried about the Commerce Clause being trashed by our courts and by our legislature, in an era where you are worried about the federal government steamrolling everyone else, in an era where Rick Scott has to really gamble on telling the federal government to take a hike when it comes to high-speed rail, this wouldn't be a problem if the states still had a role in the federal government at the legislative level. And that's what you need to look at. The second thing I want to talk about is the number of congressmen. Now, a little history. The first Articles of Congress was the name given to what would become the Bill of Rights. The original proposal had 21. A lot of those got consolidated down to 12 proposed amendments. 10 of them would become the Bill of Rights. And they were submitted more or less in rank order. The first one was not the First Amendment. That was the second one that was proposed. The first one was proposed, and it basically said, we wish to establish the number of congressmen at a rate to where it will expand over the next 20 years as the population grows until such time as it reaches 200. And then at that point, it should be set to a point where there will be one congressman for every 50,000 individuals. Now, at the time this was written, there was about one congressman for every 30,000 individuals. And so those were the numbers they were comfortable with. This didn't pass. A lot of congressmen opposed it, obviously. It did get through the House and the Senate, but it was never ratified by all of the states. Only 11 states ratified it at the time it was proposed, so it missed it by, I believe, 2 states. Now, that was all well and fine. Congress kept expanding until 1911, the Apportionment Act of 1911, where they set the number at 435 congressmen. There was some debate on Tennessee coming into the Union at the time. And then due to some changes over time, the inability to pass another Apportionment Act after the census of 1920, they decided, let's go ahead and keep this 1911 and freeze it. And so in 1941, they passed the Apportionment Act that essentially froze Congress at 435 people. It eliminated the need to do any more apportionment acts as required by the census to apportion the seats of Congress. It became an automatic process that would basically take the 435 seats and divvy them up based on population, more or less equal. The effect of that is as follows. As I said, in 1789, about 30,000 people per congressman. By 1843, that's about 47,000. It's not too bad. By 1913, when this came to pass, and when the 17th Amendment was passed, that number was 194,000. Today, the average ratio is one congressman for every 709,760 constituents. In this district, and I know this because I ran in a judicial race that almost duplicated the borders for the 1st Congressional District, that number is about 415,000 individuals in the 1st Congressional District. 415,000. Mine wasn't much bigger, it was 436,000. So that's a huge difference. Now, if this had passed, and we had a 1 to 50,000 ratio, based on the 2010 census, the number would be approximately 6,175 congressmen. Now, let me put it in perspective, and I'm glad Dave just walked in because he's a good example of this. Okaloosa County has 170,500 individuals according to the 2010 census. So, let's put in comparison. In 1789, there was about 30,000 to 1. The 5 seats in Okaloosa County, about 30,000 to 1. By the 1913, basically that 170,000 that Okaloosa has is very similar to the 194,000 number that was the average. So if we put this in terms, today, at the 30,000, we would probably have 5 congressmen, as opposed to 1 spread over roughly 4 counties. If we were at the 1913 level, we would have 1 congressman in Okaloosa County. Walton and Bay County would be sharing 1. Santa Rosa, not quite. It'd probably be split a little bit to us, a little bit to Pensacola. And of course, Escambia County might even have 2. So Northwest Florida would have 6 congressmen. Now, think of it this way. Here's the effect. How much easier would it be to get a meeting with our congressman instead of 3 months for 20 minutes if it was the same as getting a meeting with Dave, a county commissioner, or Bill Patterson, who has been and hopefully will be a city councilman? How much easier would it be to get our opinions heard in Congress if we could get to our congressmen because there were so few of them? This is very important. 435 congressmen, that really concentrates power in a few hands. And as a practical matter, it makes it virtually impossible to see all your constituents. Now, again, putting in perspective, during my campaign, I had to be in 4 counties. I had to spend a lot of money to get out there. $165,000 was what we had to spend. And I didn't even win the race. The guy who won had the help of several individuals and probably spent close to $500,000. But in a smaller district, 30,000, someone like Bill or Dave can win because during the campaign, I saw these guys out there every single day, shaking hands, putting up signs, attending events, and getting out there by the simple expedient of knocking on doors and introducing themselves. I got a lot of votes from the hands I shook, but it was physically impossible to get out and shake everyone's hands. When you have a district of 30,000 people or 50,000 people, that's a lot more doable. And here's the effect. In terms of spreading out democracy, it makes it easier for people like us to campaign. For me to run for judge, I fortunately was an attorney who had a nice savings, and I could afford to shut down my business for a month or 2, and I could afford to put a lot of money into it and raise a lot more. I won't be able to do that again anytime soon. However, Running for a race with 30,000 or 50,000 people is a lot less. You can knock on a lot of doors in that time frame. You can put up signs. You can get to your constituents. You know a lot of folks. Anyone in this room, assuming you meet the constitutional requirements, could run for Congress if your seat was only 30 to 50,000 people. And think about the other effect. How powerful would individual congressmen be if there were 6,000 of them? This would allow a lot more ideas to come in there. Congressmen could afford to focus on singular issues. Coalitions could be easily done. One congressman could say, hey, we're both from Okaloosa County. I'm going to focus on the military. That'll free you up to focus on things like Obamacare and gun control. I'll protect, you be offense. Things like that can occur. People can pursue things. Multiple parties would have better traction because right now, if you're not a Democrat or Republican, you really don't have much power in Congress. Joe Lieberman being the known exception to this rule. But this would allow other parties to come in. Tea Party members, socialists, libertarians, whoever wanted to. There would be a much more healthier mix. Ron Paul, there's a joke that someone said on Capitol Hill. He said, there's two kinds of people that deal with Ron Paul. There's Republicans who hate Ron Paul and Democrats who hate Ron Paul. And here's the point. Ron Paul's a libertarian. And I'm not here to say whether I agree or disagree with him. The point here is he has a hard time advancing his ideas because he is constantly bucking and rocking the boat. And as a result, a lot of his good ideas are just remaining good ideas. In order for him to advance his agenda, he has to start compromising in ways he doesn't like. Now, we can debate whether that's a smart or a bad idea, but the point here is with 6,000 people, you could have 30 or 40 Ron Pauls and actually get something done. You could also be, if we didn't like the fact that we can't talk to Jeff Miller, he'd be out of office. It's that easy. Because I can guarantee you someone in this room would run. Now, during the campaign, there was a gentleman who did run against him, Gary Krause, I believe. John Krause, I'm sorry. Good guy. Worked his tail off. I saw him at pretty much every campaign event I ever went to. And did a good job of getting the word out. Jeff Miller barely lifted a finger because he had the power of the incumbent. Now, I'm not saying this is good or bad against either of them. I'm just citing this as an example. But here's the point. When that election was over, Jeff Miller got 80% of the vote. And, more importantly, when they did a name recognition survey about the time of the election, despite all his effort, Gary really didn't have good name recognition, despite everything he'd done. Put out signs, knocked on doors, been to every event, had radio ads. Basically, only about 30% of the voters even knew who he was. Whereas everybody, Jeff Miller had about 90% name recognition just by being in office. That would change. This cuts power. It gives the opportunity to advance. It makes elections a lot more competitive. It puts them within reach of the common man. People in this room could run for Congress. Now, it is an uphill battle. I speak from experience. When you're campaigning in a district of 400,000 individuals, and this isn't one where a lot of money is spent. We're not talking here New York's or Los Angeles's. It is a time-consuming effort that will suck a huge amount of financial resources and literally is a 24-hour-a-day job. Not a lot of people can do that. Not a lot of people can afford it. And as a result, it limits who can run. It keeps our best and brightest out of it. Because here's the other thing. It's not a very fun job. You learn to like it. If you're good, you learn to like it. You learn to get out there. You learn to network. But here's the thing. It really self-selects. Your best doctors, your best lawyers, your best businessmen, your best retired military personnel, your teachers don't run because nobody wants to jump into that arena. And so changing this one simple law from 1941 would have a huge effect because it allows us to increase the number of congressmen available. And here's the other thing.